My name is Pav and I'm a Senior Account Manager here at Qlic and your host for today's session. And I'm also joined by Jon from Sophos. And today we couldn't be more thrilled to have you all here with us. But before we jump into the heart of our discussion, let's take a moment to highlight what we do here at Qlic. At Qlic, we're not just about providing IT services, we're passionate about making a difference, especially in the charitable sector. And with years of working alongside charities, we understand the unique challenges they face when it comes to technology. That's why we're dedicated to providing tailored solutions that empower charities to focus on their missions without worrying about IT obstacles. So from robust cybersecurity measures to seamless cloud solutions, we've got you covered, and our team of experts is committed to delivering reliable and cost-effective IT services, ensuring that charities of all sizes can thrive in this digital age. And today, we're privileged to have the special guest presenter, Jon Hope from Sophos, joining us to shed some light on human-led threat hunting. And Jon brings with him a wealth of knowledge and experience in cybersecurity, and we're eager to learn a lot from him. Just so that you're aware, there is going to be a short Q&A after the session, so please feel free to add any queries to the Q&A section within Teams by using the button at the top of the window. And there you'll also find a link to our consultation booking form, and we're delighted to offer all attendees from today an IT consultation at no cost, covering multiple topics including cybersecurity. And so without further ado, let's kick things off and delve into the fascinating world of cybersecurity with Jon. Over to you, Jon. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Pavan, for that intro. Yeah, I'm just going to reiterate, if you do have any questions, I would love to pick up those at the end of the session. So do take the time to ask anything that's on your mind, and we'll get to that at the end of the session. By way of introduction, as has already been mentioned, my name's Jon Hope. I'm Senior Technology Evangelist here at Sophos. I won't bore you with my entire career history because that's what LinkedIn's for. But I will say I've been at Sophos since 2010. I've enjoyed lots of different jobs during that time, various different departments. We have a wealth of different products and services here at Sophos, so it's been great to build up my own library of experience by moving around different parts of the business. But it's not really about me, of course. It is about the content that I wanted to deliver to you today. And you're absolutely right, we are going to be talking about human-led threat hunting. But before we do that, it's important to understand and get a little bit of context about why human threat hunting is so important. And in order to do that, and to give you some background, I'm going to take you through some research that we conduct here at Sophos. So we're going to have an observation of the threat landscape, and I'm going to draw on two bits of research. The first of which is the State of Ransomware report. This is a document that we publish every year. It is an independent survey of 3,000 network administrators, IT managers, decision makers, people very much like yourselves from all across the world in a wealth of different sectors and a wealth of different verticals and a wealth of different geographies. These individuals were selected for us at random by an organisation called Vanson Bourne. We don't even ask the recipients who they are using for cybersecurity. So do please bear in mind when you see some of these statistics that these are probably, in fact, almost certainly not Sophos customers. But we do want to know a lot about their experiences of cybersecurity. So that's the State of Ransomware report. The other document is the Active Adversary report. And where the State of Ransomware report is effectively a survey, the Active Adversary report is actually a white paper which is derived from all of the experiences we have here at Sophos. So we offer an incident response service, which is effectively like the cyber fire brigade. You can call us up if you have a cyber incident, and we'll work with you to resolve that issue as quickly and as effectively as possible. That gives us a wealth of information about things like cyber criminal techniques and tactics and what they do once they really get a foothold into an organization. So some of the research comes from there. We also offer a managed detection and response service, which I'll come on to later on, which is where we help organizations with their cybersecurity on a day-to-day basis. And again, that gives us a wealth of information. We have over 21,000 organizations worldwide using that MDR service. So it gives us a great range of telemetry. And of course, all of our products, they also send information back about things that they've seen, threats that they've observed, and all of that intel goes into that Active Adversary report. Both of these reports are available on the Sophos website. They are available for download free of charge, and it is well worth reading both of them. They do have a lot of interesting information in them, but I'll save you some of the heavy lift for now, and I'll give you some of the highlights. The first of which is that in that survey of 3,000 network administrators, 66% of them saw at least one ransomware attack in the 12 months running up to the survey, which, if you think that's a high number, is actually exactly the same as it was last year. So this tells us that ransomware is, and it continues to be, a major logistical challenge for organizations. Of those attacks, 76% of them actually resulted in successful encryption of data. And this tells us two things. It tells us, first of all, that those organizations were probably not adequately defended. If data has been encrypted, then obviously the cybersecurity measures in place had actually let them down. And it also tells us the cyber criminals are getting better at what they're doing. And we'll explore why that is in just a short while. But what we can see from that statistic is that's gone up from 65% the previous year. So in essence, the cyber criminals are getting better at what they're doing. Next up, and potentially the most troubling statistic for me as a cybersecurity practitioner, is that 46% of those organizations, they elected to pay the ransom. So they felt that their best or their only option was to trust the cyber criminals and the hope that they got their data back. This is a really bad place to be, because it tells us this organization had no other choice. And it's also potentially funding this long-term cycle of ransomware. If we continue to pay the ransom demands, we are effectively perpetuating the problem and actually ultimately encouraging more people into that, I'm going to call it an industry. And then last but not least, the average cost of ransomware is an eye-watering $1.82 million. I appreciate for some of you that might be a completely unrealistic figure. I'm going to phrase that a different way and say ransomware can and consistently does put organizations out of operation. The cyber criminals are very good at targeting their ransom demands based on the size of organization, their ability to pay, and even things like how well they're insured. They do a lot of research before they actually leverage that ransom demand, and they know fine well that if you move into the commercial world, if we were to target the Mrs. Miggins bakery down the road with 3 employees, that asking for $2 million is just unrealistic. So they target their demands based on exactly how big the organization is. It's a very scientific process. In terms of who the organizations are that fall under attack, this is an interesting spread here of the likelihood of being hit by ransomware. We don't separate out charities directly, and we don't separate the volunteer sector out directly. But if we look at some of the sectors that are most popular in terms of ransomware attacks, you'll see that the cyber criminals, first of all, they have no morals. You'll see there that education is a sector which is very, very popular for cyber criminals. You'll also see that healthcare is in there as well. You'll also notice as well that things like local government and state government is also in there as well. And this tells us a couple of things. Like I said, first of all, it tells us they have no morals. I don't care if they disrupt people's lives or even potentially put human life at risk, which is obviously quite a common output when you're attacking healthcare, for example. It also tells us as well that cyber criminals are motivated by return on investment. And let me expand on that slightly. Essentially, cyber criminals, they go through a process of how much money can I get out of an organization versus how difficult is it to get in. And you can see that very clearly because education is a sector which is typically underfunded, under-resourced, and considered to be a soft target by the cyber criminals. And you can see it's a very popular sector. Conversely, IT, telecoms, and high technology is the sector at the opposite end of the spectrum, which is least likely to be targeted. Now, even though these organizations may well have a large pot of cash, they are typically organizations that will invest a lot in cybersecurity and therefore are considered to be a tough target. So you can see that split is based on how easy it is to penetrate an organization versus what the likely return is. So it does mean that the volunteer charity sector is a sector which is quite often, unfortunately, targeted. You will still carry a wealth of information like bank details, personal identifiable information, and depending on the kind of services that you provide, you may well be holding sensitive information, depending if you're intervening at people's worst points in their lives, for example, or they have special needs, or whatever the scenario might be. That is typically information that you would not want to put in the public domain. The cyber criminals know this, and they will typically hold you to ransom against that. So who are behind the attacks? The media would have you believe that this is what a cyber criminal looks like. We've all seen lots of graphics of this nature showing a hoodie toting individual hanging out in mom and pop's basement working in isolation. The reality, however, could not be further from the truth. The vast majority of ransomware is actually delivered by one of a small number of major criminal gangs. If you add the numbers on this screen together, you get to almost 100%. So we know, first of all, that the cybercriminals are very organized, and we know a lot about the structure of cybercrime because of this particular gang up here, which is Conti. Conti is a name that you might have heard of before. Conti was the A-game player in ransomware in 2021. They were responsible for an excess of 25% of ransomware worldwide. You'll notice there's a significant shift, and Conti is now not even hitting 5%. And actually, if we were to redraw this graph for 2023, Conti actually no longer exists. The reason that's the case is Conti had a very public disagreement over the Ukrainian conflict. Without getting too political, cybercrime gangs are essentially franchises, and whilst Conti was headquartered out of Russia, many of the affiliates that actually take part in the ransomware activities were actually Ukrainians. So when Conti announced very publicly that they were going to support Russia in their activities in the Ukraine, the Ukrainian contingent weren't exactly on board with that particular message. And what happened is Conti had a very public falling out, very public disagreement, and a lot of data spilled out from there. So we know a lot about cybercrime gangs because of that data leakage. And you need to be thinking less hoodie-toting individual in basement, and you need to be thinking more line manager, monthly target, monthly salary, HR, marketing departments, basically everything you find in a legitimate business. The only thing that's different, of course, is how these people are actually going about making their money. Now, you might be wondering at this point, well, why is the structure of a cybercrime gang actually important? Why is it relevant to me? It's important because what we cannot do is we cannot underestimate the capabilities of the cybercrime gangs. And in particular, we cannot underestimate the ability for them to deploy human beings to attack organizations. In a world where we are increasingly relying on AI, so you may have a home assistant. I'm going to swerve naming any of them in case they spring to life in your living rooms. You may have one of those AI assistants there. You might be using something like Copilot to help you with your workload. The cybercriminals are actually going in the opposite direction. They are utilizing human beings to leverage many of their attacks. And this presents a major problem for cybersecurity vendors like us and our peers in the market. The reason being is that if you look at data-driven attacks and software like malware, code is highly predictable. It executes the same way every single time. So in relative terms, the ability to block viruses is actually relatively straightforward. The problem comes when you throw human beings into the equation, because human beings are notoriously unpredictable. Human beings are blessed with the ability to problem solve. They look at challenges, they might try different techniques, they might pivot to other devices. They're essentially working their way around traditional cybersecurity measures. So you might be wondering as well, we looked at those statistics and you might be thinking, well, why is the world of cybersecurity so bad? And I've just explained one of the reasons why that is the case, because of this human-led attack. But there are, in my opinion, three significant challenges that are happening in the world of cyber right now that all come together to give us this perfect wave of ransomware attacks. The first of which is the fact that, as I mentioned earlier on, the cyber criminals are getting more effective. One of the side effects of coalescing into criminal groups is that the cybercrime gangs, actually, they learn better together, just like we do. This is why we have education establishments, for example. We all learn better collectively. Cybercrime gangs can share ideas internally and externally with other criminal groups, and it's led to an improvement in the sophistication of the code. Then you've got the human element. Humans are increasingly part of the attack chain, and what I mean by that is, if cybercriminals can't get into an organization through technology means alone, they will often target the human being. So this involves things like social engineering and phishing. So being able to dupe a user into carrying out an action they otherwise wouldn't do. And this is getting increasingly successful for cybercrime gangs because we actually give them a bit of help here. Unfortunately, everything that we share online, anything like LinkedIn, your social media, all those kind of things, all that is intel. It's euphemistically called OSINT, or open source intelligence. It's basically giving the cybercriminals a leg up. So we see less phishing campaigns about your rich uncle that's just passed away that you never even heard of, and that they've got $1 million in their bank account, to more like, you play golf at this golf club and they have an event on this day and you probably want to be fed, so you should fill out this form that explains your dietary requirements. You know, it's much more accurate. It fits the individual's reality much more because of the things that we share online. And then finally, and this is the challenge that we're going to focus on for the rest of this session, is the situation where the cyber criminals now increasingly using legitimate tools against us. Instead of using malware and viruses to get into organizations, instead they use the tools that your IT administrators will use on a day-to-day basis against the organization. So they use things like remote desktop capabilities, they'll use things like PowerShell, things that admins use every single day, and you cannot turn them off because they are intrinsic to your operational requirements. And this presents a real challenge for cybersecurity vendors like us. Essentially, if I summarize all of those things, technology on its own simply isn't enough to protect against the latest generation of threats. You can go out there and buy whichever cybersecurity technology you want, but on its own, it will simply not always work. So the question then is, how do we combat these newer generation of challenges? And the only way to really do that effectively is to carry out threat hunting, looking for the warning signs. Very rarely do we see an attack that goes from zero to all of the data being encrypted instantaneously. The cybercrime gangs will typically get into an organization, they'll explore, move laterally, look around the estate, and they will leave a trail behind. In fact, in as many as 83% of the cases we investigate, we see the telltale signs that an organization was about to have a really bad day. And if only the organization had spotted those things, then they may have been able to avert the attack. The problem is that that is a sea of data that we're talking about. Your devices all across the estate are producing log files every day. Your endpoints, your servers, your firewall, your router, your wireless access points, your public cloud, everything is generating logs. And somewhere buried inside one of those log files might just be the telltale sign that tells you your organization was about to become under attack. But it is a bit like looking for that metaphorical needle in the haystack, unfortunately. And it doesn't help that the cyber criminal gangs will actually typically target organizations at their weakest time. So we see that 91% of attacks are now actually landing outside of business hours. So it's not enough to just simply be monitoring your estate and looking at your telemetry during business hours. You need to have eyes on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, because that's what the cyber criminals do. That's how they operate, unfortunately. And they know that attacking organizations when there's nobody around will give them the maximum opportunity to do damage in the estate. They're actually getting quicker as well. So I talked about warning signs. We used to measure dwell time, and the definition of dwell time, by the way, is from when a cyber criminal gets into the organization to the time they carry out their action on objective, which is typically to encrypt data and launch ransomware. We used to measure this in weeks, then it became days, and now you can see here that more or less 50%, in fact, slightly over 50% of ransomware attacks specifically, they're dwelling for 5 days or less. So in some cases, we're talking about attacks that take simply hours. And what this is doing, it's narrowing down that window of opportunity to go find those threats before they become a really significant challenge. So not only is it a case that technology on its own isn't enough, but actually having a bunch of tools to search across your estate probably doesn't equip you to be effective as a threat hunter either. Buying tools is one thing, and having the ability to use them is something else. So using those tools like XDR, those kind of capabilities to search your estate, is probably a little bit like me putting on a set of boxing gloves. It doesn't necessarily equip me to be a fighter. So another way of phrasing that is that cybersecurity is now effectively too difficult for almost all organizations to deal with effectively on their own. So let me present what we do to help with that. We offer a managed detection and response service, which is the real key focus of this webinar, because what this is doing is providing you as an organization with that human-led threat hunting expertise that is so desperately needed. We provide a fully managed 24/7 by 365 service. Basically, we have a team of cybersecurity experts that it's their job, and they specialize in detecting and responding to these kind of cyber attacks that technology on its own simply wouldn't be able to prevent. And how we do that, or what we do on a day-to-day basis, is we collate telemetry. So we collate all of that information I talked about, all those log files, all those indicators that there's something going on that might be interesting, not just from our own products. So we do sell protection on endpoints and we have firewalls and that kind of thing, but we also integrate with a wide range of cybersecurity vendors, some of which you might recognize on here, some of which you might be using. The idea and the logic behind that is essentially, if you as an organization have a bunch of tools that you like, that's okay. our MDR service will work alongside those things as well. We understand that times are hard financially right across the board. There is no desire to rip and replace things that you've already purchased if they're doing the job properly. There's no appetite to do that. We completely understand, which is why we are happy to work with those technologies and actually help you unlock more value from them. Because if you've invested in, let's say, a third-party firewall, if you're not looking at the logs and reports that come from there, you're probably not getting the most out of that product. And by wrapping our MDR service around it, what you're effectively doing is maximizing the return on investment from the things you've already purchased. So what do we do with all this telemetry? Well, everything that we get, whether it be from Sophos or whether it be from one of these other cybersecurity vendors, everything goes into our data lake, and then we process that data with a view to getting it in front of a human analyst as fast as possible. It sounds really straightforward, but I just want to show you some of the challenges that exist inside this space. And I'll do that pretty quickly. Don't worry too much about what you see on the screen here. This is an illustration of one of the problems with collating data from multiple sources. If you've never seen a firewall log before, then today's your lucky day. What I'm going to show you here is this is exactly the same threat as reported by 3 different firewall vendors. One of them tells us this is threat level 4. So vendor A classifies this as threat level 4. Vendor B tells us this is threat severity high. It has a score of 50 and is also threat level critical. So they can't even decide amongst themselves. And then finally, you've got vendor C here with a threat level of 9. Now, I don't know whether 9 is 9 good because 10's really low, or is 9 really bad because 10's as bad as it gets. I mean, what is the scale? How does that map to high, medium, and low? The first thing that we do with all of this data is everything gets standardized. So when our threat analysts pick up a case, they already know exactly what the level of the severity is, and everything is normalized, so they're seeing the same format of data time and time again. The next bit of secret sauce inside MDR is the correlation capability. Because it's one thing to find all these interesting bits of telemetry, but you can still get easily inundated with data. Do not worry about this interface. This, I'm showing you behind the scenes. This is what our analysts see. This kind of weird sea creature looking kind of object here is actually how our MDR platform perceives a phishing attack. And what's going on here, on the left hand side, you've got a bunch of Windows endpoints. On the right hand side, you've got Proofpoint, which in this scenario was the email filtering provider for this organization. So you'll notice there's actually no Sophos in here at all, apart from the service itself. This is a small organization with 100 seats. They got hit with a phishing attack. And actually, you can see just in the center there, if you're eagle-eyed, you'll see that this generated 234 alerts. And that means that an analyst would be inundated with trying to deal with all of these alerts. Our platform then actually collates all this together. It realizes these are all part of the same attack and then bundles them in together and sends one notification out to our analysts. In this scenario here, this is technique T1192 on the MITRE ATT&CK framework. If you've no idea what I'm talking about, very quickly, this is basically telling our analysts that this is an email that has come in with a link that is trying to encourage people to click on, that is targeted in some way. The MITRE ATT&CK framework is basically a way of describing different formats of attacks. So our threat analyst has everything they need to know in order to carry out an investigation. They will find from that platform where the email came from, who it was delivered to, what is the link, what is the subject of the message, what is the body of the message, and are there any attachments on there? And then they can carry out their threat hunt using all of those things. Now, how long does it take to get that in front of an analyst? Believe it or not, it takes less than a minute. So it's taken me way longer to explain than it does to actually happen in reality. The next thing that happens is our human analysts typically take about 25 minutes to investigate an incident. And then we have a choice. We can either fix the problem for you, or if you've got an IT team, then they can actually take over at that point and remediate internally. It's entirely up to you how you want to operate. We'll talk a bit about mixed modes in just a short while. But if you choose to let Sophos fix it for you, it typically takes a full cycle of 38 minutes from finding the suspicious event through to shutting it down. I appreciate that is a number that you may not have any context for. So I'm just going to draw your attention to the bar across the top there in the center. This is a graph showing typical incident response closure times by internal security teams. It was actually a survey conducted by Gartner. And first thing to know is if you've got a security team internally, you're probably a pretty big player already. So we're talking about airlines, hotel groups, banks, that kind of thing. Their mean time to respond is 16 hours, and their slowest time to respond was 30 hours. Even if you take the average at 16 hours is an eternity. And it's an eternity in which nothing positive is going to happen. You've got criminals wandering around your estate, stealing data, encrypting files, leaving back doors that can come back to you later on. Nothing good is going to happen in that time. So if you want a definition of exactly what you get with our service, that mean time to respond to 38 minutes is basically what you're paying for. And that gives you huge advantages in shutting down these issues before they become major significant problems. I'm glad to say that we are very well received in the marketplace. We have, as I said, in excess of 21,000 organizations worldwide utilizing our service. This is the G2 report. If you've not seen G2, this is essentially TripAdvisor for cybersecurity. This is a report which is based on users who actually consume our service giving their opinions. So it's not analyst driven, it's actually by the people who consume our service. And you'll see we're top right hand corner. Top right seems to be universally the best place to be in these reports. We are the most reviewed and one of the highest rated MDR vendors out there, which we are absolutely delighted about. And the reason why we believe that so many people are delighted is because of the superior cybersecurity outcomes we deliver. Obviously, you've got the ability there to respond really quickly, but there's a hidden benefit as well. As I mentioned, Sophos is the world's largest provider of MDR services. We have in excess of 21,000 organizations worldwide consuming our service. There are other players in this space, but if you added the nearest two competitors together, they still wouldn't even get close to the 21,000 that we have. And I'm not telling you that from a position of being arrogant. The reason I want to share that information with you is that it exposes us to a huge quantity of these threat investigations. And every one of those threat investigations that we carry out, obviously we fix the problem at hand for the customer, but we never waste any intel. So all of those indicators of compromise, as we call them in the industry, so for example, where that email came from in the phishing attack and what the link is that it wanted people to click on, what were the techniques behind it, all that intel goes into our labs. And it means that our labs can then make our products better. So we go through this loop where if we investigate an attack in deepest, darkest Peru, for example, within about an hour or less in some cases, every single Sophos customer consuming this service is protected against that threat. Our goal is to minimize human interaction with the attack. So we use the human expertise very sparingly, and we never want to investigate the same incident more than once. And it means our products also get better, even if that intel has come from Microsoft or it's come from Proofpoint or it's come from one of these other vendors. It actually allows us to make our products better as a result. And you're only going to get that kind of scale when you're looking across the world with a high number of consumers, which is why I wanted to mention just how large we are and how we operate at such scale. I thought I would cover some of those things off for you. The first of which is, what about my existing team? What happens to them? Well, in most cases, you probably don't necessarily have a security team in-house. But if you do have one in-house, then first of all, that's great. Good for you for being so cyber secure. My question is, what are those analysts actually doing on a day-to-day basis? Because they often end up playing this game that I like to call alert whack-a-mole. You know, in that scenario where you've got 234 alerts, for example, in a really small organization, that's 234 alerts that need to be dismissed and dealt with. We can make this SOC analyst super sharp, because instead of giving them 234 alerts to look at, here's your problem, these are the indicators, this is what you need to do to go and solve the problem. We can make them super sharp, we can get them quicker, more effective. But in most cases, most organizations just don't have any kind of threat hunting expertise. It's important to draw the line between being a really good IT manager and being a really good systems administrator and being a threat hunter. They are two very different disciplines. Most organizations don't have access to them, and they probably don't have access to them 24 hours a day. And that's okay, because the whole idea of the MDR service is we cover the times that you can't cover. It is a team sport. So if you want us to call your IT team Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, we'll call them. and out of hours we can pick up and just deal with it on your behalf. We can even have a situation where we call 3 people, and if no one answers, then we'll deal with the problem ourselves, because we know cybersecurity is, time is of the essence. So it's a team sport. We work with you. We work with your existing teams, your existing response processes, and of course, I've already mentioned we work with your existing technology stack as well. So MDR is kind of working with you and where you are as an organization today, effectively. Now, I appreciate I've covered a lot in a relatively short amount of time, but if I was to summarize, then basically the world of cybersecurity is changing. Active adversaries, so humans operating attacks, are now commonplace, and it means that if you've got a human attacker, you basically need a human defender in order to protect the organization. Most organizations don't have that access, which is where MDR comes into play. We provide those threat hunting services for those organizations that can't do it at all, or they can't do it around the clock. And that's exactly what we're here to do, support organizations